Chapter 13, Part 2, by way of review. Steps involved when a microbe causes disease in a host. They have to find a portal of entry, attach firmly, survive host defenses, cause disease, cause damage and disease, and then exit the host. So first step one, portals of entry becoming established. A portal of entry is a characteristic route taken by a microbe to initiate infection. Usually it's through skin or mucous membranes. Exogenous means that it originates from outside the body, the environment, another person or animal. Endogenous already exists on or in the body. It's normal biota or a previously silent infection. So, infectious agents that enter the skin, some sites of entry are nicks, abrasions, punctures. Intact skin is very tough barrier that few microbes can penetrate. But if you start itching and scratch to break the skin, then the skin is no longer intact. Some infectious agents create their own passageways into the skin using digestive enzymes. Then the gastrointestinal tract can be a portal of entry through food, drink, or other ingested substances. They are adapted to survive digestive enzymes and abrupt pH changes. The respiratory tract, that's a portal of entry. Gateways to the respiratory tract are the oral cavity, through your mouth, and the nasal cavity. Continuous mucous membrane covering the upper respiratory tract, sinuses, and auditory tubes. Microbes often transfer from one site to another. The extent to which an agent is carried into the respiratory tree is based on its size. Small cells are inhaled more deeply than larger ones. Urogenital portals of entry. Sexually transmitted infections. The pathogens are transmitted by sexual means. They account for 4% of infections worldwide. 13 million new cases in the United States each year of sexually transmitted infections. The entry points through the skin or mucosa of the penis, external genitalia, vagina, cervix, or urethra. Some pathogens infect during pregnancy and birth. The placenta is an exchange organ formed by maternal and fetal tissues. Separates the blood of the developing fetus from that of the mother. It permits diffusion of dissolved nutrients and gases to the fetus. A few microbes cross the placenta and are spread by the umbilical vein into the fetal tissues. Other infections are transmitted perinatally as the child passes through the birth canal. Here's a picture of the transplacental infection of the fetus. These little green cells here are an example of those that come through the umbilical cord. Bacterial cells here. Maternal blood pools within the intervillous space. And there is the umbilical cord there on the baby. Torch, T-O-R-C-H, common infections of the fetus and neonate. Toxoplasmosis, other diseases, and the T-O-R-C-H will help you remember toxoplasmosis, other diseases such as syphilis, Coxsackie virus, varicella zoster virus, AIDS, chlamydia, rubella, cytomegalovirus, cytomegalovirus, and herpes simplex virus. So these are common pathogens that infect during pregnancy and birth, and they cause torch. Toxoplasmosis, other diseases, rubella, cytomegalovirus, and herpes simplex. So, Step 2, after they have found a portal of entry, these little microbes, these little pathogenic microbes. What does pathogenic mean? Causes disease. Adhesion is a process by which microbes gain a more stable foothold on host tissues, depending on bindings between specific molecules on both the host and pathogen. A particular pathogen is limited to only those cells and organisms to which it can bind. Once it's attached, a pathogen can invade body compartments. Quorum sensing is the chemical communication between nearby bacteria critical to establishment of infection. Here's a picture of the adhesion. This first one here, you see the little fimbriae off the cell. They are adheding. They are attaching to the host cell, fimbriae. Then here are these capsules, bacterial cells that adhere to the host cell. And then spikes, viral spikes. Are viral spikes only found on envelope viruses, or are they also on naked viruses? Say it. Both. And we know that we have spikes on envelope viruses and spikes on naked viruses. Naked viruses just don't have an envelope. All right. There are some adhesive properties of microbes. Neisseria gonorrhea, which causes gonorrhea, uses fimbriae. E. coli causes diarrhea, fimbriae, fimbrial adhesion. Shigella gives you dysentery, fimbriae attached to the intestinal epithelium. Mycoplasma, the disease is pneumonia. It's a specialized tip at ends of bacteria fuses tightly to the lung epithelium. Pseudomonas aeruginosa, you're going to use some Pseudomonas aeruginosa in lab today. In fact, there are 5 microbes that we are going to use today to make our smears, smear preparation. And some of them are in a broth, and others are on a slant. So I think the last time I told you that we'd use slants, but we're using slant and broth. Streptococcus pyogenes, the disease is pharyngitis and impetigo. What is impetigo? Sores, bumps all over your body. Most commonly on the legs and arms. Streptococcus mutans and Streptococcus sabrinus is involved with diseases of the mouth, dental caries. Influenza virus can give you polio. Polio virus, that's just the opposite. Polio virus gives you polio, and influenza virus gives you the flu, influenza. HIV, you get AIDS. The viral spikes adhere to white blood cell receptors. And Giardia lamblia is a protozoan that gives the disease giardiasis. Surviving host defenses. We said that white blood cells are phagocytes that go around engulfing and destroying pathogen by means of enzymes and antimicrobial chemicals. There are some anti-phagocytic factors, like the virulence factor used by pathogens to avoid phagocytes, that circumvent some part of the phagocytic process. So phagocytes engulf the microbe, and the microbe can live inside the white blood cell, but there are some anti-phagocyte, and these are some anti-phagocytic factors. Virulence factor. What does virulence mean? What is virulence? Is it the degree of the seriousness of the microbe? Virulence factors are structures, products, or capabilities that allow a pathogen to cause infection in the host. Adaptations that a microbe uses to invade and establish itself in a host, and the virulence factors determine the degree of tissue damage that occurs. So the degree of the infection that's caused. Is it very virulent, or is it just small virulence? The degree of tissue damage that occurs. Exoenzymes are secreted by pathogenic bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and worms. They break down and inflict damage on tissues. They dissolve the host defense barriers and promote the spread of microbes into deeper tissues. Some examples of these exoenzymes are mucinase, keratinase, and hyaluronidase. A potent structure of cellular damage, that's what toxins are. A toxin is a specific chemical product of microbes, plants, and some animals that is poisonous to other organisms. An exotoxin is secreted by living bacterial cell into the infected tissues, and there are many types. An endotoxin is not actively secreted. It's shed from the outer membrane, and it's only found in gram-negative bacteria. Origins and effects of circulating exotoxins and endotoxins. Here under the exotoxins, its characteristic is toxicity, and exotoxins are toxic in minute amounts. Endotoxins are toxic in high doses. They are specific to a cell type, blood, liver, nerve, induces TNF production resulting in fever. It has characteristic effects on the body. And an endotoxin is systemic fever and inflammation. Small proteins are exotoxins. That is the chemical composition of the toxicity or characteristic of it. Lipopolysaccharide of the cell wall is under the endotoxins. Exotoxins can be converted to toxoid, which causes a characteristic toxoid formation. And under endotoxin, it cannot be converted to toxoid. Fever. Do they give fever? Usually, exotoxins do not yield fever, but endotoxins do. Now, just to go back a couple of slides to remind ourselves about exotoxins and endotoxins. Exotoxins are secreted by living bacterial cells to the infected tissues, where endotoxins are not actively secreted. They are just shed from the outer membrane, found only in gram-negative bacteria. A few gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria are exotoxins, and endotoxins are all gram-negative. That's what our lab is about today. We'll be doing quite a bit on determining gram-negative and gram-positive bacteria. There are different types of hemolysis by different black bacteria on blood agar. So how is an injurious host response induced? Many cases of microbial diseases are the result of indirect damage or the host's excessive or inappropriate response to a microorganism. Pathogenicity is a trait not solely determined by the microorganism. It's a consequence of an interplay between the microbe and the host. If you have ever encountered this microbe before, what might your immune system do the next time it sees that same pathogen? Okay, our immune systems, what kind of cells have memory? B cells, T cells? T cells, B cells. Which one? A localized infection is one that only it enters the body and remains confined to a specific tissue. Has anyone ever had a boil before under your arm? It hurts. Boils, fungal skin infections, and warts are examples of localized infections. A systemic infection spreads to several sites and tissue fluids, usually in the bloodstream. If it's viral, it could be measles, rubella, chickenpox, or AIDS, bacteria, brucellosis, anthrax, typhoid fever, syphilis, or fungal histoplasmosis and cryptococcosis. Infectious agents can travel by means of nerves or cerebrospinal fluid. Now, a focal infection exists when the infectious agent breaks loose from a local infection and is carried to other tissues, such as tuberculosis, streptococcal pharyngitis, scarlet fever. Toxemia, infection remains localized, but the toxins are carried through the blood to the target tissue. Then we can have a mixed infection where we have several agents that establish themselves simultaneously at the infection site. As you can see from this picture, they can be all morphological types. The blue that you see here is what morphology? The little blue microbe. What is it? Is it a bacillus? Does bacillus and rod mean the same thing? What about these little yellow ones here? There's 3 of them in a row. What is that? Coccus or cocci, coccus. What about these red ones? We got 2 different groups of red ones. These little round ones here are coccus, but the one that I'm pointing to now, what is that? Spirilla, okay? Polymicrobial diseases such as gas, gangrene, wound infections, dental caries, and human bite infections sometimes all carry several microbes, polymicrobial. Then we can have primary and secondary infection. The primary infection is the initial one, and the secondary infection occurs when a primary infection is complicated by another infection that's caused by a different microbe. Such is the case sometimes with urinary infections, or in this case right here, it's either vaginal, urethral, is where the secondary infection comes. Vaginal infection. Primary is urinary. Acute versus chronic. What does acute mean? It comes on rapidly. It has short-lived effects. But a chronic infection progresses and persists over a long period of time. What's an example of a chronic infection? Huh? Say the word again. Severe, that's what you're saying. Okay, severe. And an example of a name of one that lasts for a long period of time, over years. All right. Signs and symptoms. What is the difference in a sign and a symptom? A sign is any objective evidence of disease as noted by an observer. It's more precise than symptoms. And a symptom is a subjective evidence of disease as sensed by the patient. So can I tell you what your symptoms are? No. Can I tell you what your signs are? I'm the observer. I'm looking at you sneezing and coughing. I see signs. Syndrome is a disease identified or defined by a certain complex of signs and symptoms. I meant to bring quiz 4 with me today, but I'll have it from now on because sign and symptom are both questions that's on there. Common signs and symptoms of infectious diseases. Sign, something that I can see. Only would I know you had a fever if I took your temperature, right? But that I still would be the observer. Let's just say I finally made it through nursing school and became a nurse. Septicemia is a sign. Microbes in tissue fluids, chest sounds, skin eruptions, leukocytosis, leukopenia, swollen lymph nodes. Now, can I see swollen lymph nodes without doing some kind of test on you? Yeah, I can. I mean, you know, where are our lymph nodes? What about the ones up around your neck? Abscesses, tachycardia is increased heart rate. I might look at you and think you have an increased heart rate because you just got through running or doing something, other activity that made you pant a lot. But what would I actually have to do to know for sure if you have an increased heart rate? All right. And antibodies in the serum. Now, some symptoms, these are things that only you know. Chills, pain, ache, soreness, irritation, malaise, fatigue, chest tightness, itching, headache, nausea, abdominal cramps, anorexia or lack of appetite, and sore throat. Signs and symptoms of inflammation. Inflammation is the earliest symptom of disease. So who recognizes that symptoms? You do. Edema is the accumulation of fluid in an afflicted tissue. Granulomas and abscesses are walled off collections of inflammatory cells and microbes in the tissue. Lymphadenitis is swollen lymph nodes. Leukocytosis, increase in the level of white blood cells, which is often a sign of infection in the blood. Leukopenia, septicemia, bacteremia, viremia. Bacteremia, small numbers of bacteria are present in the blood, but they are not multiplying. Viremia is the presence of viruses in the blood, whether or not they are actively multiplying. When you have septicemia, it's a general state in which microbes are multiplying in the blood and are present in large numbers. So some infections go unnoticed. They are asymptomatic, meaning no symptoms, subclinical or inapparent infections. The host is infected but does not manifest the disease. Can you think of one like that? Examples? Patient experiences no symptoms or disease and does not seek medical attention. Most infections are attended by some sort of sign. Vacating the host, step 5, finding a portal of exit. This is the avenue for pathogens to get out, exit the host. Secretion, excretion, discharge, and sloughed tissue. They are respiratory and salivary portals, the escape media for pathogens that infect the upper and lower respiratory tract can be in your mucus, sputum, hock it up, Have you ever, did your parents tell you if you got something down in your throat and it's coming up, when you hock it up, you should do what? Spit it out. Don't swallow it again. Nasal drainage and other moist secretions. Skin scales. Oh, you got scales on your skin? Yes. The outer layer of skin and scalp is constantly being shed into the environment. Household dust is composed of skin cells. A single person can shed several billion skin cells a day. This is off the beaten path. Do you know a way to make dust not be in your house for a long time? Like more than just, I'm going to dust today with my sledge or whatever kind of dusting furniture polish I have, and my rag or whatever type thing I'm using to dust with. What could I do to that to make it last a long time, like where the dust won't come back for 2 or 3 weeks? Use a bounce or whatever type, what is bounce? A softener? Fabric softener. I actually make dust rags by sewing on the fabric softener onto it. And if you dust with it, try it and see if that works for you. The dust won't come back for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. That was a little tidbit that is off of the beaten path. Here we go. Fecal exit is another exit. Some intestinal pathogens can cause irritation in the intestinal mucosa that increases the motility of the bowel. Resulting diarrhea provides a rapid exit for the pathogen. Helminth worms release eggs and cysts through the feces. That's great. Feces containing pathogens are a public health problem when allowed to contaminate drinking water or when used to fertilize crops. Yes. Urogenital tract agents involved in STIs leave the host in vaginal discharge or semen. It's a source of neonatal infections that infect the infant as it passes through the birth canal, such as herpes simplex, chlamydia, candida albicans. Candida albicans gives a grown female what? Yeast infection. Pathogens that affect the kidney are discharged in the urine. Removal of blood or bleeding. Blood has a portal of exit when it is removed or released through vascular puncture. Blood-feeding animals are common transmitters of pathogens: ticks, fleas, mosquitoes. What is the mosquito that was West Nile? That's virus. I'm trying to think about, what is Zika? Zika's a virus too. I'm trying to think of a mosquito. I don't remember this summer hearing of any kind of specialized mosquitoes. You know, like last summer, it seems like I stayed on the inside because I was scared of those mosquitoes. Oh, I saw this on the news yesterday. A brain-eating amoeba. Did anybody see that on the news? Okay, well, there again, I can't tell you exactly where it was. I want to think that it was found somewhere down in Mobile. But what is an amoeba? Is it a protozoan or a... What is an amoeba? Okay, and there are some amoebas that will eat at your brain. I hope I never come in contact with it. Drinking the water? Amoebas are in the water. Okay, the persistence of microbes and pathologic conditions. Latency is a dormant state of an infectious agent. During this state, a microbe can periodically become active and produce a recurrent disease. Sequelae is long-term or permanent damage to organs and tissues. So we have these 4 phases of infection and disease. So these are the phases of the infection and disease, what we talked about before about the portal of entry, incubation. That was the stages. And then finally it exits with the portal of exit. But the 4 phases of infection and disease are incubation period, which is the time from the initial contact with the infectious agent to the appearance of the first symptoms. The prodromal period, when the earliest notable symptoms of infection appear. Period of invasion, infectious agent multiplies at high levels, exhibits its greatest virulence, and becomes well established in its target tissue. And then the convalescent stage. Patient responds to infection and the symptoms decline. Can the patient still give someone else a disease if they are convalescent and if they are getting well? Yes. So here is a chart that shows that the height of the infection is the period of invasion. We've already gone through incubation, prodromal, and now we're at the invasion. And after it invades and stays there for a while, if you look at the time, it's the longest time period. Then you convalesce, the convalescent period, and the continuation period. Reservoir. What is a reservoir in this terminology? It is the primary habitat in the natural world from which a pathogen originates. It can be a human or an animal carrier. It can come from the soil, water, or plants. Source is distinct from a reservoir. A source is an individual or object from which an infection is acquired. Here are some living reservoirs. Animals other than humans and arthropods, such as mammals, birds, reptiles, and so on. What can you get from a bird? Can you get the bird flu? Mammals, reptiles. Humans who are actively ill serve as reservoirs. A person suffering from a cold contaminates a pen, which is then picked up by a healthy person. That is indirect transmission. Alternatively, a sick person can transmit the pathogen directly by sneezing on a healthy person. Achoo! There can be carriers. That's a person who is fully recovered from his hepatitis, but is shedding hepatitis A virus in his feces. May use suboptimal hand washing technique. We don't want to use any suboptimal hand washing techniques. We have a lab on hand scrubbing. Tell me, do you think the longer I scrub my hands, the better? Or will a 3-minute scrub be just as effective as a 20-minute scrub? You use soap, right. Are you ever going to get rid of all the microbes? Then we have arthropods. When an arthropod like this, what is this right here? The arthropod is the host and reservoir of the pathogen. It's also the mode of transmission. Carrier states. A carrier is an individual who inconspicuously shelters a pathogen and can spread it to others without knowing it. Vectors. In epidemiology, a live animal that transmits an infectious agent from one host to another. The majority of vectors are arthropods. A biological vector actively participates in a pathogen's life cycle. It serves as a site in which the pathogen can multiply or complete its life cycle. Then we have mechanical vectors, which are not necessary to the life cycle of an infectious agent. They merely transport the pathogen without being infected. Two types of vectors: biological. The biological vectors are infected themselves. Has anyone ever seen a live bat? This mosquito here and this chicken, they are all infected. But a mechanical vector is not infected. It can just carry the infection from one source to another. From one site to another. That's why you want to get rid of as many big roaches and bugs as you can. One good way to do that, besides calling your pest control man or lady, is to mop your floors with vinegar, lemon juice, and water. It not only kills bugs. You might find some, but they'll be laid up upside down dead.
I think that's not right. I work with vinegar every day.
Well, then you need to get the pest control people.
We do have pest control, but the pest control says the vinegar breaks them.
Really?
They like the smell of vinegar. They like the taste of it. Salty.
Well, then maybe it's the lemon juice that works with the vinegar. Huh? The lemon juice, okay. I would think that would be a bad situation for a dialysis unit. Huh? Yeah.
It ain't everywhere I go. I've been everywhere, even out of the country. They have roaches.
In dialysis units, especially.
Why do they choose a dialysis unit over anywhere else?
Because of all of the sodium. We got salt pellets. We got vinegar that we use because our dialysate baths, our magnesium and potassium mixture. They love all that stuff. And then you clean with bleach. We always clean in between each patient with bleach. They don't run from it. We did everything. We even got camphor tablets and put it down. They do not stay away.
Like camphophenique? What kind of, you said camphor?
The camphor tablets that smell like menthol?
Yeah.
We even took those. Somebody told us that would keep the roaches away. We put those down, they still come. They love it. And I've been to Germany and they still have roaches.
I hope I never have to have kidney dialysis. Okay. All right. Well, it works at my house. But I don't have any dialysis tubing and all the other things that you have in a dialysis center. Zoonosis is an infection indigenous to animals but also transmissible to humans. Human is the dead end host and does not contribute to the natural persistence of the microbe. The spread of disease is prompted by close associations of humans with animals. Well, I won't say this, but my next door neighbor kisses her dog in the mouth. When I see her out there doing that, yeah, it's the spread of disease promoted by close association of humans with animals. People in animal-oriented or outdoor professions are at greater risk. Question? All right, here are some common zoonotic infections. Viruses include rabies, yellow fever, viral fevers, hantavirus. Hanta comes from what? Hanta. rats, rodents. Influenza, West Nile virus. West Nile virus comes from wild birds and mosquitoes. Bacteria, zoonotic infections include Rocky Mountain spotted fever you get from dogs and ticks. Leptospirosis from domestic animals, anthrax domestic animals, brucellosis from cattle, sheep, and pigs, plague, rodents and fleas, salmonellosis, mammals, birds, reptiles, and rodents, telluremia, rodents, birds, and arthropods. And other miscellaneous zoonotic infections include ringworm, toxoplasmosis, trypanosomiasis, trichinosis, and tapeworm. Tapeworm comes from cattle, swine, and fish. What should you do for all of your pork meat that you're going to eat? Somebody said soak it in vinegar. Microbes have adapted to nearly every habitat in the biosphere: soil, water, air. Most are saprobic, which means what? Saprobes feed on what? And cause little harm to humans. Some are opportunists, but a few are regular pathogens. So our non-living reservoirs are soil, water, air. Acquisition and transmission of infectious agents. A communicable disease occurs when an infected host can transmit the infectious agent to another host and establish infection in that host. Something is contagious when the agent is highly communicable, especially through direct contact. So sneezing, somebody sneezes and all their little sneeze nuclei touch you, you might get the cold. Non-communicable does not arise through transmission of the infectious agent from host to host. So what is a communicable disease? One that where the infected host can transmit the infectious agent to another host and establish infection in that host. Horizontal versus vertical transmission. Horizontal transmission occurs when the disease is spread through a population from one infected individual to another. Vertical transmission is transmission from the parent to the offspring via ovum, sperm, placenta, or milk. We have patterns of transmission in communicable diseases. Horizontal, kissing and sex are horizontal or vertical? Huh? I'm just asking. Look at the definitions again. Vertical transmission generally occurs from parent to offspring, okay? How about, you can also get the horizontal from just touching, not actually kissing and sex. I mean, you can get it that way also, but touching. Droplet contact, such as when you sneeze. Parenteral transmission via intentional or unintentional injection into deeper tissue, such as needles, knives, branches, broken glass, etc. And here over here, these people, this lady right here is talking, and look, I don't know if you can see the little red things coming out of her mouth. Droplets. That can be colds or chicken pox. Then we have indirect transmission. A fomite is an inanimate object that harbors and transmits pathogens such as doorknobs, telephone receivers, and faucet handles. We talked about that in lab. Then what are our vector transmission types? They can either be mechanical or biological. Indirect spread by vehicles, fomites. A vehicle is any inanimate material commonly used by humans that can transmit infectious agents. A fomite is an inanimate object that harbors and transmits pathogens. It's not a continuous source of infection. Then we have that old famous oral fecal route. The fecal carrier with inadequate personal hygiene contaminates food during handling, and an unsuspecting person ingests it. That's why when you're in the restaurant and you see the people who work there come into the bathroom and use the bathroom and leave out without washing their hands. Is that where you want to eat? No. And if I see it, I'm going to report it. Water and soil harbor microbes that can sicken humans, can also become temporarily contaminated with pathogens that come from humans. The air. Indoor air can serve as a support medium for the suspension and dispersal of respiratory pathogens via droplet nuclei and aerosols. Look at that man right there. He is letting out a lot of droplet nuclei, isn't he? That must have been a harsh sneeze, because generally you sneeze out of your mouth. This stuff is coming out of this man's nose. Dried microscopic residues created when microscopic pellets of mucus and saliva are ejected from the mouth and nose. Aerosols are suspensions of fine dust or moisture particles in the air that contain live pathogens. Then we can have some healthcare associated infections. These are infectious diseases that are acquired or developed during a hospital stay or stay in another healthcare facility like a nursing home or otherwise healthcare facility. The rates of healthcare associated infections can range from 0.1 to 20% of all admitted patients. What is MRSA? Okay, look that up for me. I think it's methicillin-resistant, METHICILIN, Staphylococcus aureus. Medical. Yes. Hospitals what's another disease you can get in the hospital besides MRSA? Just regular staph. Something else you can think of? Medical asepsis practices that lower the microbial load in patients, caregivers, and the hospital environment. Surgical asepsis ensures all surgical procedures are conducted under sterile conditions. We already know that all of their instruments should be what? Sterilized. An infection control officer implements proper practices and procedures throughout the hospital. He or she is charged with tracking potential outbreaks, identifying breaches in asepsis, and training other healthcare workers in aseptic technique. You know about the aseptic technique, don't you? Yes. Koch's postulates to determine etiology. The essential aim of the study of infection and disease in determining the etiologic agent, that is, the causative agent, what caused it. Robert Koch developed a standard for determining causation of disease that stood the test of scientific scrutiny. He determined the causative agent of anthrax and developed Koch's postulates, which are a series of proofs that establish classic criteria for etiologic studies. What did we say the word etiologic meant? An etiologic agent is the causative agent. Is this the etiologic agent? Here we find evidence of a particular microbe in every case of the disease. Then they isolate the microbe from an infected subject and cultivate it in pure culture. Do you know how to do pure culture technique? They perform full microscopic and biological characterization. Then they inoculate a susceptible healthy subject, like a healthy rat, with the laboratory isolate and observe the same resultant disease. Re-isolate the same agent from this subject. And what you should have is the same agent that you started out with. If a virus causing a respiratory disease is ingested, it will not cause disease. True, false? The minimum number of microbes required to cause diseases is the ID. What does ID stand for? Help me out here. Speak to me loudly, softly, just speak. Okay. The infectious dose, ID, infectious dose. How many people completed chapter 13 on Connect? How many people completed 13? All right. A blank is objective evidence of disease. During the period of blank, a pathogen exhibits its greatest virulence. Would it be the period of incubation? Or would it be the period of, what period would it be? The etiology of all infectious diseases can be determined by Koch's postulates. Let's talk about epidemiology. Okay, 9:45, 9:40. Epidemiology, effects of diseases on the community. You are going to do an epidemiology lab. It's called morbidity and mortality, where you will be given, or you will choose a disease to look up. You'll go to the Centers for Disease Control and you will determine morbidity and mortality for a 1-year period for a specific disease. Epidemiology involves the study of the frequency and distribution of disease and other health-related factors in defined populations. Notifiable diseases are reportable. They have to be reported. If you go to an emergency room and have one of these notifiable diseases, the doctor has to notify the Centers for Disease Control. By law, some diseases must be reported to authorities. Other diseases are reported on a voluntary basis. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention are responsible for keeping track of infectious diseases nationwide. They are part of the U.S. Public Health Service. Morbidity and mortality report. Just got through talking about it. A weekly notice of disease is published by the CDC. The CDC shares its statistics on disease with the World Health Organization for worldwide tabulation and control. Epidemiological statistics deal with the prevalence of disease. That's the total number of existing cases with respect to the entire population. The incidence, the number of new cases over a certain period of time, also known as the morbidity rate, and the mortality rate. What is mortality? Death. It measures the number of deaths in a population due to a certain disease. Point source epidemics, one in which the infectious agent came from a single source. Common source epidemic results from common exposure to a single source of infection that can occur over a period of time. A propagated epidemic results from an infectious agent that is communicable from person to person and is sustained over time in a population. A pandemic is spread of an epidemic across continents, often worldwide. We have index case, which is the first patient found in a particular epidemiological investigation. An endemic is an infectious disease that exhibits relatively steady frequency over a long period of time in a particular geographic locale. And sporadic just means occasional cases are reported at irregular intervals. Some global issues in epidemiology: increase in infectious disease incidence, newly identified microbes, HIV, SARS. What does SARS, S-A-R-S, stand for? We have novel strains of influenza and some re-emerging diseases such as tuberculosis, yellow fever, and dengue fever. Bioterrorism versus agroterrorism. And that is the end of chapter 13. We'll start 14 on Thursday, finish up next Tuesday, and have a quiz on 13 and 14. When, Miss Bolden? Well, you guessed right. Next Thursday.